Boulder Police Politics, Investigative Conflicts and Case Resolution, an examination of department conflicts, institutional pressures, and investigation direction. Point 1. The institutional context. The Boulder Police Department in December 1996 was a mid-sized municipal law enforcement agency serving a Colorado university town. The department had not conducted a high-profile homicide investigation of this magnitude in recent memory. When the Ramsey case arrived, a wealthy family, a young victim, public visibility, media intensity, it became the defining investigation of the department's contemporary history. From the earliest hours, the case presented challenges that went beyond traditional homicide investigation. A missing child in a residence with ransom note, yet evidence suggesting she was dead in the house. A family with resources to hire experienced legal representation. A media presence that would grow exponentially. An evolving understanding of what had actually occurred. Into this context came institutional questions about resources, about direction, about which investigative theory would guide the department's work. These questions were not unique to Boulder. They are inherent to any major investigation. But the Ramsey case would expose tensions within the department and between the department and the district attorney's office that would ultimately reshape how the investigation was conducted. Part 2. Chief Thomas Kobe and Investigative Direction. Thomas Kobe served as Boulder Police Chief during the early and mid phases of the Ramsey investigation. Kobe was the command authority responsible for the overall direction of the investigation, resource allocation, and the management of personnel assigned to the case. Early in the investigation, the police department's focus was concentrated on the family as the most likely suspects. This focus was not unreasonable given the circumstances. The child had been found in the house. Family members were present that night. The evidence suggested inside knowledge of the house and the crime. A logical investigative starting point was to examine those with access and proximity. However, as the investigation progressed and evidence accumulated, questions emerged about whether the department's focus remained proportionally balanced or had become narrowly fixed on the family as the only viable theory. These questions came not only from outside observers, but from within the investigation itself, from investigators who were assigned to the case and who developed different views of where the evidence pointed. Part 3. Officer Linda Arndt and Early Conflicts. Officer Linda Arndt was one of the first responders and remained involved in the investigation in its earliest days. She was present in the house during that morning and participated in the initial response and ongoing investigation. According to subsequent litigation, Arndt and other officers involved in the investigation became the subject of extensive media criticism. The criticisms alleged that they had made mistakes, mishandled the investigation, and contributed to the police department's failure to identify and apprehend a suspect. Some of these criticisms were directed specifically at Arndt. Arndt alleged that while she and fellow officers were being publicly criticized, Chief Kobe did not defend them or take action to correct what she claimed were false statements. Instead, Kobe imposed what Arndt characterized as a gag order, prohibiting anyone in the Boulder Police Department from speaking to the media about the Ramsey investigation. According to legal documents, when Arndt retained an attorney, and that attorney approached Kobe in October 1997, requesting either that the chief publicly defend her or that she be allowed to respond to the criticisms herself, Kobe declined both requests. The attorney's letter alleged that the department had allowed Arndt to become a scapegoat, if not the primary scapegoat, by failing to publicly stand behind her against the media criticisms. This dynamic, media criticism, lack of department defense, gag order preventing officers from defending themselves, created friction within the department and raised questions about how leadership was managing personnel and public relations during a high-pressure investigation. Part 4. Resource demands and investigative scope. The Boulder Police Department was expending significant resources on the Ramsey investigation. According to official police statements, expenses incurred by the department through March 30, 1997, were $119,141. This included $21,377 expended in December 1996 alone, and an additional $97,763 through March 30, 1997. The 1997 expenditures included $69,406 for overtime, $18,506 for travel, and $9,851 for investigative expenses. For a municipal police department, these were substantial allocations. The case was consuming resources that might have been allocated to other investigations or departmental functions. The question of whether these resources were being allocated efficiently and whether they were being directed toward the most promising investigative avenues became a point of institutional consideration. There were questions about whether the department was pursuing all available leads, or whether the focus on the family was consuming resources in a way that meant other investigative directions received less attention. These were not merely budgetary questions. They were investigative questions about where time, personnel, and expertise were being directed. Part 5. The involvement of Lou Smit. In March 1997, the Boulder District Attorney's Office hired Lou Smit. Smit was an experienced homicide detective with 30 years of experience. He was widely regarded as an expert investigator who had successfully cracked other child murder investigations. He had a reputation for thorough, methodical investigation and for being able to see patterns that others might miss. Smit was brought in to work on the Ramsey investigation as a consultant and investigator for the DA's office. This arrangement, district attorney investigators working alongside police investigators on a case, is not uncommon, but it can create institutional complexities. The DA's office is technically independent from the police, with the district attorney serving as the chief prosecutor rather than a subordinate of the police department. Smit's presence signified that the district attorney's office was taking an active investigative role. This was significant because it meant that there were now two separate law enforcement agencies, with different reporting structures and potentially different investigative priorities, both working on the same case. Part 6. Investigative Theory Divergence. As Smit familiarized himself with all aspects of the investigation, he became exposed to both the evidence and the investigative approach being taken by the Boulder Police Department. According to legal documents, during the course of his tenure, Smit became familiar with all aspects of the murder investigation. However, at some point in this process, a critical divergence emerged. According to the legal record, Smit felt that the Boulder Police Department refused to investigate leads that pointed to an intruder as the murderer of JonBenet, and instead insisted on focusing only on defendants as the culprits. This is a direct statement about an investigative conflict. Smit believed that the evidence pointed toward an intruder theory. Smit believed that the police department was not adequately investigating intruder leads. Smit believed that the police were maintaining a narrow focus on the family as suspects without proportionally investigating other possibilities. This divergence in investigative theory, one investigator and agency believing the evidence supported an intruder theory, another agency believing the family, was the focus, created institutional tension. It raised the question of who was directing investigative priorities and on what basis those priorities were being set. Part 7. Smit's Resignation and Investigative Loss. The conflict between Smit's investigative approach and the Boulder Police Department's approach reached a point where resolution became impossible. Smit resigned from the investigation in September 1998. His resignation represented the loss of significant investigative expertise. Smit had years of experience in child homicide cases. He had been brought in specifically because of his reputation as an expert. Yet the divergence in investigative philosophy and approach led to his departure. The resignation also represented a public indication that there were internal conflicts about how the investigation should be conducted. When an experienced investigator resigns from a high-profile case, it generates questions. Why did he leave? What did he disagree with? What does his departure mean for the investigation's direction and credibility? Part 8. The removal of Steve Ainsworth and Trip DeMuth. Following Smit's resignation, or shortly thereafter, two other men who had also believed the evidence pointed toward an intruder as the killer were removed from the investigation. These were Detective Steve Ainsworth and Assistant District Attorney Trip DeMuth. Their removal further consolidated the investigation under personnel who favored focusing on the family as suspects. It created a situation where investigators who had developed different interpretations of the evidence were no longer part of the investigative team. This raises institutional questions. Was this removal based on investigative judgment about who should lead the investigation? Or did it represent an effort to align the investigation with a particular theory by removing those who disagreed? The removal of not one, but 3 investigators, Smit, Ainsworth, and DeMuth, who shared the belief that the evidence pointed toward intruder involvement, suggested a pattern rather than isolated personnel decisions. Part 9. Family perception of police bias. From the family's perspective, as articulated by John Ramsey during his 1998 interview, the police department's investigative approach was experienced as narrowly focused on the Ramseys themselves. According to John's account, the family attempted to provide tips and leads to police, but these leads were not pursued with apparent interest. The family made over 100 requests for information from police, provided biological samples, hair, blood, DNA, provided handwriting samples, and agreed to multiple interviews. Yet according to John's characterization, none of this cooperation resulted in the police department appearing to investigate leads that might point toward alternative perpetrators. Instead, John believed the police remained focused on the family as suspects. John stated, "We said early on, look, you're spending too much time on us. Look elsewhere as well and we'll be fine." But we never got comfortable that there was anything going on but a 100% focus on the Ramseys. This perception that the police were investigating the family exclusively and were not genuinely pursuing intruder leads became a source of significant family grievance. It contributed to the family's decision to hire attorneys and to become reluctant to cooperate fully with the investigation, which the police then interpreted as lack of cooperation. Part 10. The gaze fixation problem from a police procedures and investigative psychology standpoint. The phenomenon of tunnel vision, or gaze fixation, is well documented. When an investigator or investigation becomes focused on a particular suspect or theory, there is a natural tendency to interpret all subsequent evidence through that lens. Evidence that supports the favored theory is given weight. Evidence that contradicts it may be minimized or reinterpreted. In the Ramsey case, if the police department's focus was concentrated on the family as suspects, then evidence of an intruder, window disturbance, footprints, evidence of entry, might be interpreted as staged or might receive less investigative priority. Meanwhile, inconsistencies in family accounts or suspicious behaviors would be given weight as evidence of guilt. The presence of investigators like Smit, who were attempting to maintain a broader investigative frame, looking at intruder evidence seriously rather than dismissing it, served as a counterbalance to this affixation tendency. When those investigators were removed or departed, the counterbalance was lost. Part 11. The relationship with the district attorney. The district attorney's office, headed by Alex Hunter, occupied an interesting position in relation to the police investigation. The DA is technically responsible for prosecution decisions, deciding whether charges should be brought. But the police conduct much of the investigation that provides the evidentiary foundation for prosecution decisions. In the Ramsey case, the relationship between the police and the DA's office appears to have had tensions embedded in it. The police had developed a focus on the family as suspects. The DA's office, through investigators like Smit, was exploring broader investigative possibilities. This created a situation where the two agencies, police and prosecution, potentially had different investigative priorities. The police were building what they believed was a case against the family. The DA's office was examining whether the evidence actually supported that case, or whether other theories were more viable. Part 12. The Grand Jury Convening. In summer 1998, District Attorney Alex Hunter decided to convene a grand jury to investigate the murder and possibly bring charges. This was a significant step. A grand jury is a mechanism by which evidence is presented to a group of citizens who determine whether sufficient evidence exists to indict someone for a crime. The decision to convene a grand jury suggested that Hunter believed there was sufficient evidence and sufficient questions about the case to warrant formal grand jury investigation. Grand juries can also conduct independent investigation, taking testimony from witnesses and examining evidence. The convening of the grand jury represented, in some sense, a moment where the DA's office was asserting independent investigative authority. Rather than simply accepting the police department's investigative conclusions, the DA was saying that these questions warrant grand jury scrutiny. Part 13. The Grand Jury Discharge. On October 13, 1999, the grand jury was discharged by District Attorney Hunter with no indictment issued. This was a defining moment. After extensive investigation by police, by the DA's office, and by the grand jury itself, no charges were brought against anyone. The grand jury's failure to indict suggested that despite the police focus on the family as suspects, the evidence was not deemed sufficient by the grand jury to support charges. This represented a significant institutional outcome. The police department's investigative focus had not resulted in prosecution. Why the grand jury declined to indict remains not fully publicly explained. Grand jury proceedings are conducted in secret, and the specific reasons for no indictment were not disclosed. But the outcome was clear: no charges. This raised questions about the police department's investigative direction. If the investigation had been focused on the family as suspects, and that focus had resulted in the accumulation of evidence that the police deemed significant, yet the grand jury did not indict, then either. The evidence was not as strong as the police believed. The grand jury applied a different standard than the police had used. The grand jury believed evidence existed, pointing in other directions, toward an intruder. The evidence was insufficient to meet the burden of proof for prosecution. Part 14. Media Pressure and Investigative Bias. From the beginning, the case received intense media coverage. The Boulder Daily Camera, local television news, and national media outlets all followed the case extensively. This media attention created a particular kind of pressure on the investigation. When police departments conduct investigations in the glare of media scrutiny, there can be pressure to appear to be making progress, to appear to be pursuing a particular narrative, to justify the public visibility and resource expenditure. If media narrative suggests family involvement, there may be implicit pressure to confirm that narrative, or conversely, to prove media narrative wrong. The police department's own media statements revealed a particular strategy. According to legal documents, the Boulder police publicly name defendants as subjects and apply intense media pressure to them so that they would confess to the crime. The police released many statements that implied defendants were guilty and were not cooperating with police. This strategy, using media pressure to encourage confession, is a legitimate investigative tactic. But it also creates a situation where the police investigation is publicly linked to a particular narrative, family guilt, making it institutionally difficult to pivot to a different theory without appearing to have been wrong. Part 15. Information leaks and internal conflict. Beyond official police statements, Legal documents note that many individual officers also released information about the investigation without official authorization, some of which disclosures were highly confidential and potentially undermined the investigation. These unauthorized leaks represent internal conflict within the police department. Officers with access to confidential investigation information were sharing that information with media sources. This suggests that not all officers agreed with the department's approach, or that some officers were trying to shape media narrative independently of official department statements. Unauthorized leaks can indicate that officers believe official department statements are incomplete, misleading, or wrong, and they are attempting to provide contrary information to the public. If some officers believed the investigation was unfairly focused on the family and not adequately pursuing intruder leads, they might leak information suggesting intruder evidence to counterbalance police statements, emphasizing family involvement. The leaks themselves became a problem the department had to manage, and they indicated underlying factions within the police department regarding the investigation's direction. Part 16. Cooperative efforts and family frustration. The family, for their part, cooperated extensively with the investigation in its early phases. According to legal documents, during the course of the investigation, defendants signed over 100 releases for information requested by the police and provided all evidence and information requested by the police. The family provided handwriting samples, biological samples, hair, blood, DNA, and agreed to be interviewed on multiple occasions. By standard measures, the family was cooperative. Yet the police investigation's apparent focus on the family did not diminish despite this cooperation. From the family's perspective, their cooperation did not result in the investigation broadening to explore alternative theories. Instead, their cooperation may have been interpreted as additional opportunity to gather evidence against them. The family's decision to eventually become more guarded, to insist on attorney presence, to decline further interviews, can be understood as a response to their perception that cooperation was not resulting in investigation of other leads. Part 17. Professional credibility and investigation integrity. Lou Smit's resignation in September 1998 represented a significant professional credibility issue for the Boulder Police Department. Smit was an expert. His departure signaled that he believed the investigation was being conducted in a manner with which he fundamentally disagreed. In professional contexts, when experienced experts depart because they disagree with the direction of work, it typically raises questions about that direction. Smit's resignation and the subsequent removal of Ainsworth and DeMuth meant that the investigation came to be conducted primarily by investigators who had coalesced around a family-focused theory. This created a perception, whether justified or not, that the investigation had become ideologically fixed rather than evidence-driven. An investigation that is truly evidence-driven is willing to follow evidence wherever it leads, including toward conclusions that contradict an initially favored theory. An investigation that appears affixed on a particular theory, regardless of evidence, is vulnerable to accusations of bias. Part 18. Institutional reputation and closure. By the time the grand jury was discharged in October 1999 with no indictment, the Boulder Police Department had invested enormous resources. The DA's office had been involved. The family had been under investigation for nearly 3 years, and the public's understanding of the case had been shaped by media coverage emphasizing family involvement. Yet no charges had been brought. The investigation had not resulted in closure. The department had not apprehended whoever was responsible for JonBenet's death. The investigation had not achieved its fundamental goal. The lack of charges, despite the apparent focus on the family, represented a kind of institutional failure. The police had not been able to build a case sufficiently strong to convince prosecutors and grand jury. The investigation had not resolved the crime. The department's reputation, whatever its investigative achievements may have been, was affected by the lack of closure. Part 19. Investigative Philosophy and Institutional Conflict. At the core of the conflict between investigators like Smit and the Boulder Police Department was a difference in investigative philosophy. Smit appeared to approach the case with the understanding that investigation should follow evidence, and that evidence should drive theory rather than theory selecting which evidence to emphasize. The police department's approach, by Smit's assessment, was to focus on a particular theory, family guilt, and to investigate primarily in service of that theory. This is sometimes called confirmation bias, the tendency to seek evidence that confirms a preferred hypothesis while minimizing evidence that contradicts it. These are different investigative approaches, and they can lead to different conclusions from the same evidence base. The question of which approach is more appropriate, which investigator's judgment was sound, remained unresolved and contested. Part 20. External Expertise and Departmental Autonomy. The involvement of the district attorney's investigators and the eventual decision to convene a grand jury represented external oversight of the police investigation. The DA's office was saying, in effect, that they did not fully trust the police department's investigative direction and would conduct independent review. This created a dynamic where the police department's investigative conclusions were subject to scrutiny from another governmental entity. The police led the investigation day to day, but the DA retained the power to decide whether charges would be brought, and the grand jury retained the power to decide whether indictment was warranted. For a police department accustomed to being the authority on crime investigations in their jurisdiction, this external scrutiny represented a constraint on their autonomy, yet it also represented an important check on potential bias or investigative overreach. Part 21. Unresolved Institutional Questions. What remains unresolved are the fundamental institutional questions about the investigation's direction. Was the police department's focus on the family-appropriate investigative procedure, or did it represent tunnel vision and confirmation bias? Were investigators like Smit correct in believing that evidence pointed toward an intruder, or were they being misled by their own presumptions? Did the police department adequately investigate intruder leads, or did institutional focus on the family result in inadequate pursuit of other theories? Was the grand jury's decision to not indict based on recognition that family-focused investigation had not been substantiated, or were other factors at play? These questions are not definitively answerable from the available evidence. Different observers, looking at the same evidence and institutional dynamics, reach different conclusions. What is clear is that significant internal conflict occurred within and between the police department and other investigative entities. That conflict was not merely procedural. It reflected genuine disagreement about which investigative theory was most consistent with the evidence. That conflict affected how the investigation was conducted, which investigators remained involved, and ultimately what investigative conclusions were reached. Conclusion. The Boulder Police Department's investigation of JonBenet Ramsey's death took place within a complex institutional and political context. Questions about investigative direction, resource allocation, investigative theory, and institutional relationships shaped how the investigation unfolded. The involvement of the district attorney's office, the hiring of expert investigators like Lou Smit, the emergence of disagreements about whether evidence pointed toward family involvement or intruder involvement, and the ultimate grand jury decision not to indict, all represent institutional dynamics that extended far beyond the simple question of who killed JonBenet Ramsey. These institutional factors affected what evidence was pursued, how it was interpreted, and what conclusions were ultimately reached. Understanding the investigation requires understanding not only the evidence, but also the institutional politics within which that evidence was collected and evaluated.
Okay, so here's where I'll jump in. and just kind of give my opinions on just this idea of, because we talk a lot about the media spinning stuff and all such as that, and how dare the police department, they knew nothing. That's what people say. They're like, the police knew nothing about what they were doing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This police department shouldn't even have their hands on this. What police department would? Who would do it? You act like the Boulder Police Department is supposed to be like, oh yeah, because of this happened and we've never solved a crime like that, or we've never had anything like this. You know what? We should just stop being a police department. That's what we should do. We should just stop being a police department. Yes, absolutely. Just stop being one. That doesn't make any sense. Because that's what I say. Hindsight is 20/20. You could say, oh, you shouldn't have. No, you can't. Like, in the moment, who do you call? You call the police department. And when the police department shows up, we go with what the police department does. And we usually just let the police department do what they do. But all this hindsight of what the police, y'all shouldn't even been involved. Who else would have been involved? Oh, call the Denver PD. The Denver PD? Would the Denver PD call Boulder? No, they would be the first ones on the ground, and then Boulder PD did it right. Period. They did it right. They called the FBI and said, hey, this is what we're looking at just in case. And the FBI said, okay, I got you. This is what you should do. Look for this. Anyway, so Lou Smit, enough of my soapbox. So Lou Smit was brought in as an expert, okay? And he had, these legitimate credentials. I give him that. 30 years of homicide investigation, solved difficult cases, understood investigative methodology. And according to some of these legal documents I'm working through, he believed that the Boulder Police Department was refusing to investigate intruder leads while maintaining a fixed focus on the family. That's where his problem was. And I think this is where I have sort of like this very specific question. Because I stop and I think, what was the actual evidence for the intruder theory? That's what I asked. Like, I'm trying to think in my mind. And it could be that I've forgotten. But like when I try to recollect, I try to think what was the actual evidence of the intruder theory? Like legitimate stuff. Not that you could fit through a window, but like what legitimately showed, you see what I'm saying? Over and above what we already had in favor of like internally. Okay, so not, like I said, not some sort of theoretical possibility, not potential. What do you actually have as substantive evidence that's legitimate, substantive evidence that suggests an unknown perpetrator being responsible, right? Because at the end of all of this, or before the end, whenever you want to place, it doesn't matter. Lou Smit resigned. He resigned and he left the investigation. I think he stayed close to John. He resigned in an official capacity. I think he kept working on it by himself, and I think he has like his family kind of working on it now, kind of trying to keep his files going. But he left because he believed the police weren't, I guess, properly pursuing the theory of the intruder with enough vigor that he wanted. And I think it's a little different. That's a disagreement about investigative prioritization, right? Not necessarily like a resolution of evidence. You just got mad because they didn't do what you wanted them to do. And they don't have to. You don't work for the police. You were hired by the DA. I don't have to do what you tell me to do. I don't have to do what the DA tells me to do. And that's what I'm saying. That's why the DA and the police were at odds for so long. And I think Alexander just passed away. Rest in peace to him. No disrespect toward him. I don't dislike him as a person. Just, some of the directions and ways that he did it. So, I respect, with that being said, I say I respect Smit's experience, and in everything he did. But, I do have to ask, did the police have a legitimate reason to focus on to focus on anyone but the family, right? There's a difference between confirmation bias, right? Investigating, we're looking at this fixed theory and, maybe dismissing, contradictory evidence, or you have actual investigative a prioritization based on evidence accumulation. And, you're saying, I think for example, you might say, oh, I think it's the intruder theory. I very strongly believe that. And somebody says, based on what? And you have a list of things that you can list down that actually contradict and overshadow and essentially bear more weight than what the person is presenting. For me, I think the initial direction of the BPD, the Boulder Police Department, had more weight, just in general. Like I said, I don't hate the Ramsey family at all. I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just saying, but it seemed like there was more evidence. We can't even, like I've said before, we can't even get outside of the house because we haven't sort of dismissed or disproven any of these other theories for us to go to something else. And I think it's possible that Lou was battling sort of this confirmation bias that, he got to the intruder theory by whatever method, by possibilities and plausibilities, that it's plausible. We can it's possibly it happened that the intruder went through the window. Yeah, but Lou, you're locked in on that window. What if the intruder was bigger than you? You assume that you and the intruder are the same size. Also, too, what if the intruder didn't even need to go through a window? What if they went through something else? And so now the movements, and what does that mean? Why is that important? Because the movements that the intruder would have made go a different direction. Where they enter tells me something about what you know about the house. When you tell me that this becomes a problem, when you tell me that they snuck down through the basement, that tells me that they know more about you and the house than they should. Because think about it. John is saying somebody got my financial records, or somebody knows, I leave my stuff, I leave my financial information laying around. The $118,000 check was a check that he got at the beginning of the year, if I'm remembering correctly. And I can double check myself, because I believe that check that John got at the the $118,000 check that John got was a check that he got at the beginning of the year for his bonus in January of earlier that year. And if that's the case, then this criminal has been following him a long time, and has had, sort of this disdain for him for a long time. And that means that this person has followed you to work, and he's followed you to your home for several months and has not made a move, but has followed you all around the city of Boulder. And if you never noticed that somebody was following you for that long, then it's probably possible that the person was in your midst all along. That person was right in front of you, and you didn't even know. That person is closer than you think. And at that point, we're not thinking about strangers. it's insignificant to even look at anybody outside of the Ramsey circle. Because if somebody is able to tap in and get the financial records, but also be in the home, that's sort of like a dual integration of roles. It cannot be Linda Hoffman, right? Because let me ask you this. As investigators are going through the house, and maybe I'm tripping, but as investigators are going through the house, can you tell me how many financial documents they recovered that were just strewn about? Can you tell me how many paychecks that they recovered? Can you tell me if they ever recovered a copy of his bonus paycheck stub? Right? Because John is acting like it was just laying all over the place. Okay, well, if that's the case, then John should have been able to point it out and say, see, look here, I think they got it from this. If that's $118,000, I wouldn't have found the check because I only have one paycheck stub of $118,000 in my house. We keep it over here typically. So it would have been down in the basement. Let's go down to the basement. I keep this. We found it up here, but I actually keep it in the basement. So whatever this person did was somewhere around the basement. But we were handed, my medical record, my financial records. They're all over the place. Yeah. Anybody could have gotten them. That's a dang lie. That is a dang lie. You don't just have your I'm sorry, I don't know why I want to say medical records, but you don't just have your financial records just all over the place. Your financial paycheck stubs in your house, maybe. In your office, maybe. Even in your office, you keep them in a drawer. Think about if you have your income tax documentation, your W-2s and your receipts and stuff like that. If you're an entrepreneur, all such as that. Do you just keep receipts all over the place? No, I keep them on my desk. Right? I put them in a shoebox, right? So I can keep them all in the same place, because this, even if you just keep them on the desk, like unbound, this is my catch-all for all of my business receipts and all of my paycheck stubs and all such as that. If we know Patsy didn't deal with the money, so it's no reason for you to just leave your paycheck stubs laying around, because that would be to suggest that Patsy takes the paycheck stubs and puts them in the office. Or puts them in the bank and does something and organizes and does something with them, because Patsy would be in that role. But it seems as if John handled the money primarily according to what Patsy said. And I think according to what John said, Patsy said she was not aware at all of how much John made for his bonus. So Patsy really was out here flying blind, spending money just to be spending money. Didn't even know if John made any money. I don't know how much you make, but I don't care. It doesn't matter because you make enough for me to go crazy. And I thoroughly believe that Patsy knew, because there's no way that you start spending money not knowing how much money is in the bank, especially if you're about to make big purchases. Like, let's throw a $30,000 Christmas party or a $30,000 employee party or whatever party that cost $30,000 that she threw. There's no way that she just said, let's spend $30,000 without even checking with John and saying, do we got $30,000 in the bank to go crazy? You got to stop. I need you to stop. So if those paycheck stubs were anywhere, they're sitting in John's office, then that means that somebody that is allowed to be in John's office and is also allowed to be in John's home, and not just anybody that's allowed to be in John's office and his home, because we can't just say, oh, what about the friends? Is Fleet White allowed to just walk into Access Graphics and just mosey around in John's office? And then late at night, would it not be a surprise to wake up and see Fleet White and Priscilla White in the middle of the night in John and Patsy's home? What do you need there? You don't just show up to your friend's house and just bust in their home with a key. What do you need? Would your friend not think it's weird? Okay, so from what I can tell, based on the documents, John clarifies that it was the record of the bonus, rather than the check itself that remained visible throughout the year, which is just like the record of the bonus. In his 1997 interview with the Boulder Police Department, John Ramsey explained that the $118,000 figure likely tied back to his 1995 bonus, which was paid out early in 1996. I struggle with that because if the bonus was paid out in 1996, we used to do something like an excise tax that the executive might get hit with, or companies might get hit with, for paying the executive a certain amount of money. Like, it can't be, I think nowadays it can't be over $1 million. And that's like total compensation. So if, you make a 500 grand, what some of these executives were making, over 500 grand, and then you had your bonus, that was pretty substantial. And then you were going to get, this big, maybe $650,000 payout. So if you make about 500 grand plus, say, 200 in bonuses, you're at 700K. But then you add on $600,000 payment, and you're at 1.3 million. You're $300,000 over the line. So we got to figure what to do. We got to figure out what to do with $300,000 over the next year. We got to figure out a way to work that into, so it's like $25,000 a month, which makes sense. But the way that, you might do something like that is you will work as much as you can, because we plan it years ahead to minimize the financial hit. And there's different ways to you might plus up by trying to invest, figuring out what it would be and investing more to cover the taxes if the taxes are unavoidable. Or you might just try to distribute that over the coming year to say, okay, we'll just distribute we'll give you $300,000 as your bonus, but we'll put it in writing that the rest of the $300,000, because we owe you $600,000 and $300,000 can go, but we'll put the rest of it, somewhere. So we'd have to put it on the other side of the year, which, that would work if we, I guess, if we kind of defer it, which that's not deferred comp. But anyways, I'll get back to that shortly. But he said it was paid out in early 1996, and he recalled that the net amount was approximately $118,223, and noted that because it was deferred compensation, that specific number showed up in every pay stub of mine from then on throughout the rest of the year. So 118,223. So they would have seen $9,851.92, something like that, every on every paycheck, which is what you should have seen. You should have just seen the $9,851 on every paycheck. You would not see the full 118. You would just see the 918. But then in the book, so he said that in 97, but in the book, The Death of Innocence, which I think came out in 2000, John Ramsey provided a precise figure for his bonus, stating that it was $117,050. He clarified that while the bonus was awarded in January of 1996, the amount was printed on every pay stub he received during 1996, meaning that anyone who found the pay stub in his home, whether in January or December, would have seen that specific number. If that was the case, then, okay. In a podcast interview on Defense Diaries, I think John Andrew Ramsey, John's son, and the host discussed the detail, noting that because the bonus was paid in January 1996, the amount would have been visible on pay stubs kept in the house on John's desk throughout the year, making it accessible to anyone who might have been snooping in the home prior to the murder. I'm going to let you think about that for 2 seconds. There's two things that are wrong here. The first thing that is wrong, it's another time, three things. It's another time, first when John says one figure, the dude said 118. Why not just put 118,223 or 118,200? They tell us in 1997 that the net amount is 118,223. And then in the book later on, they tell us that the amount is different. It's like $100 lower, 118,117.50. I want to know, first of all, did the police collect any of John's pay stubs? And specifically any that recorded the bonus? Because we're depending on John's word to tell us that it was either 118,223 or 118,117, or essentially 118,118. And the criminal essentially is just like, you know what, let's just make it 118 even. Okay? But you told us one thing, and you said 118,223 as a net amount. It didn't go up, it went down to 118,117. Now, that tells me something. When the intruder was working, two things. When the intruder was working, they supposedly found or went through and found the paycheck stub. So it wasn't even at the office, it was at the home. And they said it would have been in John's desk. And the person would have found it essentially because John's desk is up in his room. I think he has a study up in his room, if I'm correct. I think his study is up in his room because I think he mentioned elsewhere he would come in and put things down as a catch-all, important stuff like that as a catch-all, eventually to be taken up to his desk, to his office. And so his office was upstairs. So somebody came in and saw this. And now we know that this crime wasn't planned. Now we know that the money was an afterthought. Because somebody was apparently, so now they're telling us something different. They're telling us that the criminal didn't know how much John was making. They just assumed that John was wealthy. Didn't like him. Saw what business he was doing. Didn't like it. And the way to get back at him was to try to rob him and take his daughter for ransom. And so they didn't know how much they could get. And so, a thought came to the people. They came in and they went upstairs to John's office. They found it, wandered through the house and found it, and then wandered through his desk and found all of the paycheck stubs. Knew they had time to do this and just kind of sat there kind of reading through the paycheck stubs and went through all 12 of the paycheck stubs, assuming that all 12 were there, right there in the house. And in that case, they sat there and they added it all up and said, we're not going to worry about the top line, profit. We're not going to worry about the gross pay. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to worry about the bonus. Now, I don't understand why you would worry only about the bonus rather than the normal pay. What are you getting out of that when you say, I can't stand, I respect you, I respect your business, but I can't stand the U.S. So let me get the bonus from you when you got the pay right there. That doesn't make sense. And the problem that I'm having is that while it looks like John Andrew and John are trying to work around this defer. I'm struggling with the deferred comp part because if the bonus was paid, it's a unique situation from what I can understand, because if the bonus, they're saying it was paid in January of 1996, but John came back and said it was paid in February of 1996, but all the pay, it was earned in 1995, but it was paid as, it seems like a one-time lump sum in February for certain. But it showed up as deferred comp on his paychecks from then on. And that would mean, I think, that the bonus should have been paid in 95, but was paid in 96. That means that it would have been accruing. I think it should have been accruing throughout the year in 95, so as to show on his 95 paychecks as accrued and then paid out in February. But I don't understand how it can be deferred comp if it was accrued in 95, did not show up on 95 checks as deferred or any accumulation, but then paid in 96 and then showed as deferred. That you wouldn't mark that as deferred, I don't think. Because I know that's the direction that they're trying to go. Because if it's earned in 95, the performance year, paid in February, yeah, this is not consistent. I don't think this is right. Because it's like you have, I guess you have several scenarios that you can look at, like two scenarios. You can say that the executive earns a performance bonus in 95, standard annual bonus, non-deferred. You accrue it, and it pays out in the next year as a lump sum. And because it's a lump sum, and that's what I'm saying, because it's a lump sum and it's paid out as a lump sum in cash in January or February, the pay stub would only show it once. Because I remember getting a bonus and my paycheck showed the bonus one time. It did not show it deferred on that. And it would be bonus. And it was like bonus, not deferred comp. Okay, so that's one thing. But it wouldn't be repeatable. The second thing, option B, deferred compensation plan, if it's truly deferred, it accrues in 95, it's not paid. 96 in the future, pays out later. It sort of varies whether it's paid out on the year end, paid out at retirement, 3-year cliff, different things. And so the pay stubs sort of display this incremental accrual, not the full amount. So that it could be labeled at that point as executive deferral, etc., deferred comp, 409A type stuff. And so in neither of these normal scenarios, though, you have paid in February of 96, and it appears as a full amount on every paycheck stub. And in 96, it's called deferred comp. It would not. It would show up as 118 on every paycheck stub. It wouldn't do that. I don't think that's true. And that's what I'm saying. I don't think the cops got that. Because I think, like I said, I think if it was earned in 95, it would show accrued on the 95 paychecks and then shown in 1996 if it was tied to 1995 performance. So that's why I think calling it deferred comp is weird. And he's trying to act like it was printed on every paycheck stub. It wouldn't be. The 118 would be because you paid it out in February. So it would not show up on any other paychecks because it's done. Because if you put it on the paycheck in March, then that means you're showing that you owe him $118,000, and you don't. Because if you paid him a lump sum in February, you owe him nothing else. So that's a lie. That's a lie. That's not true. I would be interested to know if the cops have those, because and I think in 1998, when Lou Smit and Mike Cain, they were asking him questions about whether he turned some records over. I think Access Graphic business records and company financial records. They were trying to verify his assets. And I think he was kind of surprised and kind of asked him, he was like, you don't have any of that? You don't have any of those records? And so I think he thought that they had it, or he's acting like he thought they had it. He didn't know. But okay. Lou Smit pressed further, and John was like, oh yeah, I'll sign a waiver to give you anything. Absolutely no problem. But this is my thing. John and Patsy Ramsey were in a hurry to hire a lawyer. Listen to me good. John and Patsy Ramsey were in a hurry to hire a lawyer. But 2 years later, when the police were asking for phone records and credit card records and business records, and John was surprised that they did not have it, y'all were so hell-bent on getting out of Boulder, Colorado, that when the police were asking, this is what I'm saying, when people start talking silly, oh, blah, 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 the BPD, absolutely not. We're waiting for evidence and information from these people, and these people then took off to Atlanta. Hey, we still need your business records. What do you think it's me for? So now you're telling me something. You're telling me that you're kind of refusing to give me stuff. Oh, no, I'm not refusing to give you anything. If John, as he says, looked back and realized after he thought for a while and realized, I recognize $118,000, because John tried to act like, I didn't recognize it at first, but later on. Man, get that weak crap out of here. But let's just take your word for it. You recognize it later on. Oh man, yeah, I recognized it later on. Okay, fine. When you recognized it, why didn't you bring the full stack of paycheck stubs to say, let me show you this? Because if the number was at 118 on your desk, and if the criminal that fast was able to look at the paycheck stubs and see 118 and say, you know what? I should ask them for 118. How the heck? And this is their first time seeing it, right? This is their first time seeing it. Mind you, this is their first time. Let that sink in. This is the criminal's first time seeing that number. And then that criminal said, you know what? I got an idea. I'm going to go downstairs and I'm going to write a ransom note. And I'm going to ask for $118,000. That means that money wasn't the motivation. They did not go in there for money at all. Money, in any case, would have become a side quest. But money was not the motive. I'm trying to tell y'all. Money was not the motivation. You can break this down by seeing what the motivation was, by seeing what was done to JonBenet. And it was like, if money was the motivation, then why did JonBenet die in the way that she did? I mean, my God, an accident is an accident, but that was not an accident. That's the point I'm making. You come in, you tell me it's 118,223, and then later on you put it in your book that it's 118,117. What's the reason for the difference if you pulled it straight off the paycheck stub? Where did one if in the book, if in the depth of innocence, 118,117 is correct, where the heck, and that's the net amount, where the heck did we get 118,223? Because I know that's not a tax difference. It couldn't have been 118,223 and then you take out some taxes and then it's 118,117. How are we off? That means if you told us at first that it's 118,223, then that means, and the police went with it, that means that you did not turn over those paycheck stubs, something that was so clearly laying on your desk that anybody could have seen it. When you went back up there, and when the investigators went up there, they didn't collect a check that said, oh, we got his paycheck stubs. I see the 118 clear as day right here. Could have been this. John had to come and point it out. That means that those paychecks were not sitting on John's desk. If they were, the police would have picked it up. It's not true. Those paychecks were not on your desk and you did not turn those paychecks over to the police. I don't see it. And you waited until 1998, into June of 1998, about a year and a half later, some change, to bring it up and say, you know what? Yeah, I'll sign a waiver now. Yeah, but I mean, my God, we're 15 to 18 months into the investigation. When exactly did you expect to share with the class? You know that this is helpful to our investigation. When we were asking you about who do you think wrote this letter, can you give us some samples? You didn't say, you know what? That number jogs my memory. Let me go get these paycheck stubs. And then you were gallivanting out in Atlanta, and instead of saying, you know what? I think I figured it out. Because you never, how did you know? How did you get those financial records back? Because you didn't go back into the house. Maybe you got, oh, you know what? I got it back because I found them, because when we moved to Atlanta and I got my desk and I set my desk up and I started digging in my desk and I saw what was on my desk, I said, you know what? These paycheck stubs, I got about 12 of them. Or 24 of them. However many paycheck stubs you had. Doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is, when you found it, you did not go to them immediately and say, hey, I think I might have something. They had to ask you, and they had to bring you in for an interview and be like, hey, so I want to talk to you about this. And then you were like, oh yeah, and by the way, I think I found where that 118 may have come from. Do you have the paycheck stub here for evidence? Do you have the paycheck stubs here for evidence? Why do I have to pull teeth to get you to give me evidence? But y'all can run out and gallivant in Atlanta Y'all are hell bent on wrestling the body away. Oh, y'all better give me my daughter's body. Oh, I'm not about you better. You can scream and holler for that. But you can't give me a paycheck stub that could help solve the crime. Help me understand that. Playing games. I'll let you get back to the video.